Okay, so we're recording now, so just do turn off your camera if you'd rather not be on screen. Okay, we're going to start this evening with each of our three panelists giving a short introduction about really the highs and lows of the last year. So a little bit of an overview of their area with regards to rivers in Herefordshire and Radnorshire and the national picture as well. And they'll tell us what they think perhaps their key achievements are, the big wins that we've seen for wildlife, and perhaps some of the things we're a little bit more disappointed with, or things that we haven't seen progress on. But I'm only giving them about 5 minutes each, so we'll whiz through that. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Jamie to start first, from Herefordshire, and then James from Radnorshire, and then Ali to give us that national picture after that. So I will hand over to Jamie.
Thank you so much, Francis, and a big welcome from all of us to you. It's exciting to see so many familiar faces, citizens, politicians, some people with corporate interest, philanthropists, you name it, people on the call. I'm looking forward, as Fran said, to great contributions. I'll keep it lighthearted and kick us off with some hollies of hope for the river. It's been a fantastic year of meetings, of roundtables, of campaigns, but the standout for me really is about citizen power, citizen voice. And while we haven't solved this wicked, difficult, complicated problem, citizen power and action has brought it to the fore. So we feel positive, feel confident that the collaborations that are happening are really making a difference and getting the issue on the agenda. The next C for me is collaboration. I think we've reached a point of farmers, of citizens, of ENGOs better collaborating and having a better understanding of each other. Work to do, but that I think is an interesting thing to reflect upon, and certainly something that as a wildlife trust in Herefordshire we were keen to do, to be better working with our local farmers, to be challenging them positively to do the right thing, and to be celebrating where they are. And we recently had a Rivers conference hosted by Councillor Swinglehurst, a cabinet member for environment who's on the call, Bridge Across Troubled Waters, that really took us forward to support that collaborative and positive collaboration across different sectors. The last C for me then, in terms of Hollies of Hope, collective action, and a highlight for me was the Tesco AGM. We had citizens on the outside campaigning from Extinction Rebellion. We had prepared states, shareholders from the Wildlife Trust and other organisations on the inside of the meeting, putting it to corporate power to take action for our river and the supply chain, and a really positive outcome, the culmination of pressure there, I think, to get Tesco to put pressure on Avara to do some really important things linked to manure management in the catchment. Not perfect, but a really good start. So, moving on to some thorny issues, got my bramble from the woods today. AD units, are they a solution or not? Technology is developing an AD unit, anaerobic digester, stripping out phosphates. There's progress, there could be some solutions. I think people are shifting to see them as part of the answer. We've got to debate that and discuss that tonight. Cross-border collaboration, still really hard to get right, holding people on the different sides of the border to account. And the clear governance really needed. We are calling for a cross-border task force like our Herefordshire Council to, I think, have a clearer line of sight and accountability. Another thorny issue, will voluntary action, by which I mean landowner and farmer behaviour change in the catchment, make the changes that are needed? Some people are saying yes, some people are saying not. The jury is out, more to do on that one. Okay, let's move on to some juicy issues. So we've just had a change of leader. We're about to have a change of leader in Wales. We need to be influencing them. We're looking forward to hearing what James and team across the border in Radnorshire and Wales are doing. That's really important. What will our EGNO leaders, Craig Bennett's, the RSPB, the National Trust, do in the year ahead on the election linked to rivers? We've got to get really clear and really joined up. And how will the voice of the river really be communicated during the general election? That's an important one for me. Moving on to turkeys. This is an actual turkey, but Turkey Awards of the Year, I'm afraid, go to Therese Coffey and government for failing to deliver the radical action plan that she promised. I think we've still seen a lack of enforcement and real action when there have been incidents, people working really hard on that, but still a lack of enforcement. And a turkey time waster. We've had lots of issues and discussion about governance with councils, the EA, Natural England, Natural Resources Wales. It's taken too long. So the Turkey Award for time wasting has to be made to some of those involved. Bit of a tease there, but importantly, returning to our Hollies of Hope, citizen power is where it's at. Keep it going. Let's keep talking, keep up the power and action. And I'll pause there. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jamie. Great opener. So James, if you'd like to talk a bit about how you've seen the past year or so on the other side of the border in Wales.
Yeah. Hi, thank you, Francis, and good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me tonight. So I'm going to try and avoid duplication with Jamie. And I think it's interesting when we talk about the national border, because really a lot of, where we're engaged with the at least formal frameworks of the Y, we are looking at UK level governance and policy structures, or funding that comes from UK level, or cross-border working groups. Now, Wales is a different economy, different powers, and a different level of funding. And perhaps one of my low points is that it continues to feel like we're behind and potentially falling further behind. Certainly our representation at the table formally has been a bit weaker. But let's come back to the low points and start with some positives. So I think starting at the higher level, I would take that the fact that Powys County Council have increased their number of staff working on biodiversity and nature, and Welsh Government funding has increased to enable people to take action against local nature recovery plans. It's £400,000 coming into the county next year, which is significant. Also, collectively, along with colleagues from RSWT, we held a roundtable event in Haycastle back in summer, whereby there was consensus reached by a widespread of organisations. So that is the third roundtable that's been held, but the first two were led by UK ministers, were quite selective in who they invited. We had a wider representation from community, civil society, and the third sector. And obviously, we believe very strongly that the third sector has a very strong role and a very specific skill set to play in helping to deliver solutions. What was really pleasing about that was that there was agreement around the table that the Y had hit peak worst. And that is, probably the first time that's ever been captured as a minute of action. And I think the other important element of that roundtable was that there was also level agreement that the reports and findings and following actions of the Leeds and Lancaster University Refocus report should be upheld. That's important because that acknowledges that manure, stocking levels, etc., in the catchment have to be reduced, amongst other changes to regulation. So that leads me on to some of the macro low points. England has had some positive news with the ELM funding, which is the new form of agricultural subsidy. And as I'm sure Jamie will report on later, Herefordshire Wildlife Trust is part of a landscape recovery programme, which is working across, I think, some 6,000 acres on the English side. There is a lack of detail on the Welsh version of that scheme, the Sustainable Farming Scheme. There's a lack of detail in particular around the collaborative landscape elements. And there isn't now even a start date for when that might kick in. So our funding is a couple of years behind. There's a consultation in 2024 and it's supposed to roll out in 2025 at entry level. The collaborative scheme was supposed to start in 2027, but Welsh Government have recently redacted that and said they're not currently sure. It's worth noting that although Wales is devolved in terms of its decisions on the environment, the funding for that stream comes from UK Treasury. So there's a thread there around the UK elections and then how that leads into the Welsh elections. I'd also then say that there has been a weakening in the regulatory baseline in Wales around the farming rules for water. There has been a move to say that manure management plans now are voluntary only. Now, there's some psychology behind that, but the track record is that voluntary measures haven't worked, especially when there isn't the funding and support for the statutory agencies who go out and advise, support, and then where needed, enforce. If that's not there, voluntary measures don't work. So we're really disappointed about that, and that's a key focus with Welsh Government working through our colleagues at Wildlife Trust Wales at the moment. And then I would say that Wales is famed for being very progressive, and that is true in many, many areas. You know, it's done some groundbreaking policy and made some good, bold decisions. But we've got that high level commitment. You know, there's a Team Wales approach and a Rivers task force, but the local delivery, for my mind, is still rather lacking, and the support from the statutory agencies just isn't there. I'll just finish with a few more positives and just picking up on Jamie's point about collaboration, because as I say, I think there is a role for the third sector to play, and this isn't navel gazing and inward looking. This is reflecting where we're putting our time and effort, because as a wildlife trust, we are land managers and we are also advocates, community champions, and, you know, significant players in the local area. So we have got a joint project funded by the Climate Action Fund called YACT for climate. We've got 3 advisors, one in Radnorshire, one in Herefordshire, and one with the Y Valley A and B. They're available to give advice to communities and landowners on climate adaptation and climate resilience. So please do get in touch if you're interested in that. We've also been working closely as 2 local trusts, Radnorshire and Herefordshire, to build a project on the Lug. We're hoping to employ our first farm advice post in early 2024, and we've got 2 years funding for that with some capital funding. So that's a good tangible catchment and a good watershed where we feel like we can make some impact without competing with other organisations, and that builds out from our Wilder Pentwyn farm project. Wilder Pentwyn has got its own farm cluster, and we are bringing in a group of local farmers to talk about regenerative agriculture and new forms of land management. And we've got a small number of people, around about 12 to 15 people engaged, but they are interested in doing things differently because policy, funding, it's all changing and people are looking for help and support and leadership in that area. So we're looking to build out from there. We've also recently had some fantastic news that we've been able to secure 3 years funding for an advocacy and campaigns post. So that's quite nice timing. That will start in March next year. So that allows us to have a little bit of focus on the UK election and then the Welsh elections. But our main thrust for that funding was that we can offer end-to-end delivery. We can champion the good. So find farm ambassadors, find people doing good stuff and message on that. We can also support people through farm advice and project advice, but then we can, from community council level, which is, you know, the Wales's version of parish councils, right up to Welsh Government, engage in championing a sustainable future for rivers and take our message beyond just the immediate problems with nutrients, because in the next 30 years, flood and drought and the contrast between those and the importance of water and water security are going to rise at the agenda. We need to start shifting the conversation to be much more holistic, and we plan to do that. And I've probably gone over my time. I'm sorry about that, but it has been an eventful year, a really good year with lots of collaboration. I'll just finish by saying that another positive is the rise in strength of the citizen science groups that both Herefordshire and Radnorshire support. You know, we've worked very closely there. We ensure the volunteers and we help support the trustees and the volunteers there who do sterling work, and long may that continue. So that, I think, is a good point to finish on and hand back to Francis. Thank you.
Great, thanks, James. Getting into the detail already, so hope you're enjoying things so far. So finally, we're going to hear in this first section from Ali Morse, who is Water Policy Manager for the Wildlife Trusts.
Thank you, and thank you for having me along this evening. So I have the challenge of going third and trying not to repeat too much of what James and Jamie have already covered. So I think to kick us off, I will start with some of the downsides, the lowlights of the year. And I think for me, that has been around the impacts on nature. So thinking back to earlier in the year, we had the downgrading of the River Wye SSSI on the English side. Natural England recognising that the pressures facing the river in terms of water pollution, in terms of climate change, and the impact that that's having on the species in particular of the river system, meant that it was no longer considered to be recovering, but now declining. Throughout the year, we've seen endless reports of pollution from both agriculture and from the water sector. And then very recently, just in the last few days, we've had an announcement from the IUCN that states that salmon should be regarded as facing extinction in this country. So really a poor suite of impacts in terms of the state of our rivers. But I think we need to use those as ammunition, as things that we can take action to try and tackle. And for me, one of the highlights of the year is the roundtable that the Wildlife Trust held. That's already been mentioned this evening. So I won't cover too much of the detail on that. But I think the key points from my perspective there were the collaboration. So we had attendees from both sides of the border, from all sectors, and the one of the positive outcomes of that roundtable, as I think James mentioned, was that we agreed on lots of common points. As a result of that, we wrote letters to Welsh Government and to the Secretary of State on the English side, reflecting on the discussions that we had at the roundtable and the key points of agreement from all of the attendees. And we thought that it was important to do this because there are lots of opportunities to influence what's happening across government. So in terms of Welsh Government's activities around its phosphate summits, looking at how to tackle the phosphate pressures in the River Wye catchment, there is a sort of hopefully open door that we can influence the forthcoming agri-environment schemes in Wales, the sustainable farming scheme that James mentioned earlier, and perhaps tackle some of the weakening of those agricultural pollution rules. Similarly, on the English side, we wrote to the Secretary of State, who at the time, Therese Coffey, had been championing a plan for the Wye that was going to be produced by DEFRA. So we felt that it was important to highlight some of those points of agreement from the roundtable and hope that those could be incorporated into her plans. Now, since that has happened, the Minister is no longer in post, so we've just been reshaping the letter to send to her replacement. But we know that the DEFRA team is still going to be continuing work on one of the things which the previous Minister did put into place, and that was the plan for water. So this is a plan that sets out a whole suite of action that the government will be taking on water pollution, on water quantity, on the sort of management and governance of the water environment. And so we hope to see actions there that will continue to benefit the River Wye. We've also been continuing to engage with the supermarkets, and I'm sure we'll come on to discuss that in more detail this evening, but just in brief to sort of introduce that point, the supermarkets were one of the key sectors in attendance at the roundtable. And they recognise that they have a significant role to play in helping to improve the state of the Wye through supporting their suppliers, for example, to manage their land in a way that doesn't contribute to the pollution of the Wye. So, for example, we've heard this year from Avara of their commitment to end their phosphate inputs to the Wye catchment by 2025. So we're continuing to engage with those supermarkets on two fronts. We think we have a role to both hold them to account for their involvement in the state of the Wye, but also where we can work more positively together. There are potentially opportunities to speak with a common voice with the supermarkets to, for example, tell government what we want to see in terms of support available to the farming sector. So it's quite a delicate line to tread, but but we hope that there'll be some positive outcomes from the ongoing discussions with supermarkets. And finally, to finish on a few more positives, I think those sort of downsides that I mentioned at the beginning are the kinds of things that really help to galvanise public opinion, political action. So there is a huge focus across society on the poor state of our water environment, and there is a big political recognition that this is something that people really, really care about. We're seeing political parties on all sides really thinking about what they can do to improve the water environment. So this is going to feature in our ambitions for the general election next year, and we're starting to plan the work that the Wildlife Trust movement will do around engaging with prospective MPs and existing post holders as well. And we see that ending river pollution will be a part of that engagement with the political candidates and challenging them to ensure that the public concern for the state of our water environment is really reflected in what they're proposing in their manifestos and then in their future work. So I think whilst there have been certainly a number of downsides that we've seen this year, we want to try and utilise those to make the case for change and to help deliver that change ourselves too.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much, Ali. Thanks to everyone for your opening comments. Really welcome anyone coming in at this point if they've got any alternative, really positive things that they're really pleased that happened this year that they'd like to share, or anything you think we've missed out that is a huge problem that hasn't been addressed. So do keep putting your comments and your questions in the chat. That would be fantastic. I'm going to kick off with the first question to our panel, just to get right into the nitty-gritty of things straight away, and start the ball rolling, which is what are the practical solutions that we want to see happen on the ground? Jamie touched on AD, anaerobic digesters, as one of his thorny issues to be talked about. There are less controversial things that are already happening, like buffer zones next to the river. So I don't know who wants to go first with this question. Perhaps we'll go back to Jamie as he's been quietest for longest, and if he'd like to just kick off with some of those practical solutions and how we get there and prioritize them.
Thank you, Fran. Yeah, so look, in the chat, in quite a long bit of content, was what I felt was one of the most positive things from just the roundtable that the Wildlife Trust held. There were many others through the year, as we've heard, many people meeting and organising things. At the roundtable we had, which brought together farmers, landowners, chair of the EA, chair of Natural Resources Wales, there was a consensus chaired by our overarching chief executive that all participants at that meeting saw the refocus recommendations, the really important academic report, as the basis for practical action. I posted some of that content in the chat, and I know that there are colleagues on the call who are more expert than I in it, but it basically cuts to the chase that says you've got to reduce the phosphate input into the river. You've got to do that through better enforcement of existing regulation. You've got to actually, and I don't think there was a loud voice against this, you have to, if you really want to address this, be thoughtful about reducing livestock numbers in the catchment appropriately through land use transition. We can touch on that. It is obviously has controversy and tension around it, but that is exciting in terms of the practical response to how, as we've started to discuss, these big funded schemes of landscape recovery on the English side of the catchment and funding can support land use change. We've come up with a programme called Y-scapes, led by an organisation called the Herefordshire Rural Hub, in touch and collaborating with many, many farmers about how intensive land use, maize, potato, would transition back, so to speak, or indeed forwards, to a more traditional looking landscape, wetter, rougher, the river meandering more naturally, that will help change how land is used, and indeed the phosphorus levels entering the River Wye. It won't be everything that's needed, but that is a really practical one. And I think if that's happening, there's also another landscape recovery scheme led by the Duchy of Cornwall. If those two schemes can be combined, and really thoughtful incentives about reducing the P load in land use, incentivizing landowners to get also the long-term phosphorus out of the soil, not a simple approach, but indeed one that we need to grapple, that would be really exciting. Last thought from me to keep it moving. I think the exciting approach that many people on this call have led around citizen science can now be combined with landowner and farmer power, so that monitoring and looking at soil data, looking at land use with a farm and citizen community clusters could be a really exciting approach. So it's no longer an us and them approach, it's a collective response to changing how we look after our land, our food, nature and our river.
Fantastic, thank you, Jamie. James or Ali, would either of you like to come in at that point and talk about solutions and how we prioritise and fund them? Ali, do you want to? You're nodding slightly, so I'll let Ali go first on that.
Thanks. One of the solutions that we've been starting to think about and to sort of advocate for, which Jamie sort of touched on already, is that of buffers. So there has long been within farming support schemes the idea that one of the ways you can protect watercourses from runoff of pesticides, excess fertilizers, sediment, is to have a buffer strip along the river's edge. And that's all well and good, but there is a reasonable amount of scientific evidence to say that depending on the sort of form of your buffer, that can be more or less effective. Now, traditionally in some of these support schemes, the idea has been for a buffer strip might be 1 metre or 2 wide, it might be just a grassy strip along the edge of your watercourse. And that isn't necessarily going to do as much for improving water quality as is needed to improve the state of the Wye. There have been research projects in various different countries that have looked at different forms of waterside buffers and looked at how effective they are at trapping these various pollutants. And they've generally found that the bigger your buffer strip is, but not just that, the more sort of three-dimensional it is, the better job it can tend to do in helping to keep these pollutants out of the watercourse. So something that's certainly a bit wider than the minimum sort of metre or 2, something that has a variety of vegetation in it, so not just a grass strip, but something that has shrubs, trees, sort of varied topography, and also species which are deeper rooting, so that you're not just getting the surface flow, you're getting what's flowing through the soil as well. The taller vegetation also helps with things like pesticide spray, which would just completely oversail a small grass strip. So there's good evidence from these studies around the world that a more substantial riverside buffer can do a lot more to improve water quality. On the English side of the border, we are seeing through the new agri-environment schemes, the Environmental Land Management Scheme, that these kind of options are now becoming available to farmers. So there are options of up to, I think, something like 24 metres that farmers can be funded to create these riverside buffers. That's really positive. Some of the research, particularly in North America, has suggested that buffers even bigger than that, 50 metres, maybe even potentially up to 100 metres, can be really, really effective at completely preventing the ingress of pollution into watercourses. So if we're looking at opportunities to go a bit above and beyond what the agri-environment schemes provide for, then we need to either be making the case to government to offer schemes which are more substantial, or working with perhaps the supermarkets, the supply chain, so that they can support the farmers that they're working with to sort of top up what's available through the agri-environment schemes. Now, as James mentioned earlier on, the Welsh scheme, we don't have the detail of that scheme as yet, so we can see that as an opportunity to help influence its development. And certainly, as just has been noted in the chat, one of the key ways in which these buffers can be bypassed is by underfield drainage. So if you have drainage systems within your fields, then a lot of the nutrient-rich runoff can go completely underneath your buffer strips. So it's also about having complementary options on the adjacent land that can ensure that those buffer strips aren't sort of worthless. So that's one of the things that we've been thinking about. We've been starting to collate that research together and make the case for these enhanced buffer strips that would do a lot more for water quality, and also they can do a lot more for biodiversity as well. So imagine a buffer strip that's 20 or 30 meters wide along a river compared to a 2 or 3 meter grass strip. There's going to be a huge opportunity for riverside wildlife to use that habitat. And so those are the kinds of solutions that we would hope to see coming forward through enhanced options through the Environmental Land Management Scheme and the equivalent in Wales as that's developed.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Ali. If I can turn to James now. Obviously we talk about the elm schemes in England, but they're very different in Wales. I wonder if you can just talk a bit about the picture in Wales and what sort of support farmers can access for the sort of things that we've been talking about, and what the support really is on the Welsh side of the border.
At the moment, very unclear. So broadly speaking, it is agricultural support for Wales is devolved in terms of its design and implementation. Wales often waits to see what UK government would do and then tries to go one better, just in really glib terms. And it's certainly doing a lot of waiting at the moment. On paper, the Sustainable Farming Scheme is set to follow the same 3-tiered structure as the Environmental Land Management Scheme. So there's an entry level, a higher level, which is effectively pitched around countryside stewardship, or what was high level stewardship, so to support people that have got pockets of nature and elements of nature. And then there's supposed to be a collaborative landscape level, which is the highest level, and at the moment that lacks the detail really completely. Wales has opted for trying to set a baseline of every farm being required to have 10% tree cover and 10% habitat. The average for tree cover is about 7%. That seems quite logical from a policy point of view, because that's encouraging a land sharing approach. Land sparing is much more controversial, especially in Wales, because farming is tied much more heavily into culture and community, perhaps even than in England. But it has slightly diverted the conversation, because the amount of questions that Welsh government have had to take on what is a tree, what is a hedge, and what counts has really stifled quite a lot of progress. We, in 2024, have an interim scheme called the Habitat Scheme. Now, their payments are capped at 200 hectares, which is fair in many ways, especially when you think that many Welsh farms are typically around 84 hectares in size, the cap being at 200. But for a lot of the farmers we've been working with, and for indeed ourselves, we'll actually get around £6,000 to £9,000 less next year. And that leads me on to my point. I don't want to repeat anything that Jamie and Ali have said, but I would say that a big sort of solution and a big step forward for me would be to have a good, collaborative and open conversation about what destocking looks like. And if destocking is too emotive, think about different stocking, and to tie that in with food farming and health, to think about how we can effectively manage the land we've got, which is finite, and the resources, because they're finite and limited. And at high level in the media, there are apparently conflicting messages around the need to produce food to keep it cheap, to keep food security there, and the need to produce nature, clean water, etc. You guys are an informed crowd. You know that those two combine. You know, the Venn diagram is perfectly almost a circle, isn't it, really? Just one circle. So that needs to happen. And I think there needs to be a bit of a focus on a shift and supporting financially and regulatory a shift to regenerative agriculture. Now, that is a bit of a buzzword at the moment, means different things to different people, but effectively it is good soil management and good resource management, lowering your inputs and thinking about working with the grain of nature a bit more. Now, there are some fantastic case studies of people who've gone over to that method, and it's broken them out of a debt-fueled system. It's given them some free time back, and it's given them some ability to do and think about other things. It takes about 4 years to transition. It's actually very poorly route mapped and very poorly supported. A lot of the people that have done it have managed to get income from elsewhere or a first time entrance, and that needs some real support. And for me, certainly as I think about what I can do with Radnorshire Wildlife Trust and with the resources we have at hand, it's to have that conversation, to champion that change, and to support and champion the people that have done it, and think about how we can champion what they're actually delivering in terms of food, think about how that enters the supply chain and how people can buy it, because sometimes butting heads with the big system is a lot harder and a lot slower than just going around it and working with the people that are willing and building a new model. So I'll just finish there.
Fantastic, thank you, James. And just we had one question in the chat which was about tree planting along riverbanks, and I just wonder if we could widen that out. And I wondered, Jamie, if you could just give us a quick, I know we've got a lot of people from a lot of different places on the call, so I don't want to talk down to anybody, but I don't want to leave anyone behind either. If you could spell out, when we're talking about making changes on land to protect the river, so whether that's buffer strips, whatever, we've talked a bit about environmental schemes, the ELM scheme. If you could really spell out the sort of support that farmers get and how the wildlife trusts are doing projects with landowners in those areas. So obviously there's money that the farmers can get for support directly from the government, but how are the wildlife trusts sort of getting involved in that, and how can we help landowners take action as well? If you could just sort of talk about some projects and things just to make it clear to our audience the different sort of routes farmers can go through.
I'll give it a go, Francis. To set the scene, many of us will know this, but in the past, farmers through the Common Agricultural Policy were paid to be farmers, a basic payment for farming, and no matter what you did. I'll keep it really simple. Others will come in and critique me. We've got a change post-Brexit with a scheme called Environmental Land Management Schemes, which there are, to keep it simple, 3 different tiers, all as you move upwards to in an English context, to a scheme called Landscape Recovery, ultimately paying farmers to farm to create public payments for public goods, all the benefits of better quality water, soils, biodiversity, carbon, nutrients, phosphate, as we're most interested in. And so these things can be quite complicated. Farmers have got lots of understanding, lots of knowledge of their land, obviously, but as wildlife trusts, we hope to bring our knowledge of nature, of local land, to think about the type of, as Ali has mentioned, plants and planting that could happen on the edge of fields, the different configuration of land use in a particular farm area. So we're really getting out there with experts who understand soils, who understand nature, to provide advice and guidance in a way that a farmer can then think about how they configure their land use, their hedges, their spaces, what they're planting, the balance of inputs on their land. Many experts in this field, but then ultimately to apply for a scheme to the government in a way that will make real business sense for a farmer and a landowner, but also be win-win for nature. There are no experts like James Marsden on the call who may want to jump in and add energy to my overview there in terms of detail or technical examples on the River Wye. James, likewise, please do. Fran, I'll let you bring in others as you judge.
Thank you, Jamie. That was really helpful. Please do put a comment in the chat, or if you'd like to say something, just put a note in the chat so I can pick that up. That would be great. I'm going to go a bit technical now with Ali, if possible, and talk about governance. There's a lot of different groups involved in making decisions. We've had comments about Jessie Norman and the role of politicians in the chat already. There are other groups, the Nutrient Management Board, and then we've got two, not just different counties, but different countries involved with different legislation. I wonder, Ali, if you could just talk a little bit about where decisions are made, which groups have got the power, and how we really move forward through those mechanisms.
I will give it a go. It's not an easy topic. So I think, as has been mentioned already, probably the place to start with is that environmental responsibilities are devolved, which means that the Westminster government doesn't have control and responsibility for everything. So there are different structures and different processes on the English side of the Wye to the Welsh side. That's fine in administrative terms, but of course in terms of ecology, the river system doesn't care which country it's in, and we certainly see sort of examples of where the decision making on one side of the border isn't necessarily taking account of the impacts further downstream, which may be in a different country. So on the English side of the border, we have ultimate responsibility for environmental delivery, sort of sitting with DEFRA, the Department for Environment, and the key organisations that are sort of sit underneath it that have a role in the Wye are the Environment Agency, which deals with control of things relating to water, particularly permits for pollution and permits for certain farming systems that need them. And Natural England, who deal with the nature conservation side. So they are the body responsible for the nature conservation designations, and they make an assessment of whether the river and the river habitats are in good enough condition to meet the needs of the ecology. On the Welsh side of the border, all of those sort of responsibilities sit with a combined organisation, Natural Resources Wales. So it's a slightly different picture there. And they sort of answer to Welsh government in the same way that the organisations on the English side answer to the Westminster government. There is a recognition that there needs to be more cross-border working. And so there are a number of initiatives underway that try and sort of pull all of that together. So Welsh Government's phosphate summits have brought in parties from the English side. There is a similar initiative on kind of led by the Environment Agency, which is looking to understand all of the data around the state of the Wye and sort of make decisions accordingly. The phosphate, what's the word I'm looking for? The Nutrient Management Board, again, is a sort of semi-legislative structure that is tasked with trying to improve the state of the special area of conservation. So that's the international level nature conservation designation for the Wye, and that again works cross-border. And we also have the Catchment Partnership, which again covers the the whole of the Y system, and is a sort of voluntary level structure that seeks to bring together stakeholders from across the spectrum. So it brings together government, water companies, farmers, environmental organisations, citizen scientists, to try and agree and take action on the why. So it is a really complicated picture. There are lots of structures, lots of plans, lots of calls for action. And one of the things that we discussed in our roundtable back in the summer was that it's overly complicated. It's very difficult for stakeholders on the ground to sort of understand that whole picture, to work out who is doing what, who actually has responsibility for what, and whether all those things really add up to a coherent whole. So with all of the plans that exist for the why, even if they were all fully delivered, which they're not, would that be enough? And that's something that we would like to see really resolved as things move forward from here. So I don't think we have a sort of definite view on exactly which structure is the right one. Suffice to say that whichever is the structure that kind of comes out on top, it needs to ensure that it is taking that cross-border view, so that we're trying to, if not resolve, then at least kind of account for any differences in approach on the English side versus the Welsh side, and make sure that the action that's undertaken on the ground is actually having the effect that we want it to have. So yeah, a really, really rather complicated structure. Responsibilities and powers don't sit with any one body. It has to involve collaboration.
Great, thank you, Ali. Jamie, you've got your hand up. Would you like to come in there?
Well, yeah, I mean, I just, it is so complicated, isn't it? And others on this call may want to jump in, but I mean, good governance is clear, transparent, accountable. You know why there is a system, you know what you're trying to achieve. It's clear as you make progress, and to kind of get a bit tough, you're appropriately punished if you fail to deliver. There are different mechanisms for that, or indeed rewarded, of course. And I do personally like this idea of a cross-government task force chaired by one or two high, or forgive me to go on mute, or indeed leading politicians, or indeed leaders in public life. Someone who's famous, well regarded, could be from any background, of course, but ultimately someone you can look to say, what's going on, give us the update, and we really need to know. Now look, communication about what's being published and data that's being captured, forgive me, is massively improving. Citizen science has blown that apart in a fantastic way. The Environment Agency are limping to respond with their engagement website, which is good, but not good enough in terms of tangible, fast, accountable updates. I'll pause there. We can and must do better.
Thanks, Jamie. James, did you want to comment on that?
Build on it more than comment on it, because I think Jamie makes some good points, but I think this thread about what a just transition looks like is really important. So I shared earlier a little bit of frustration at Welsh Government being rather slow with the development of the Sustainable Farming Scheme, but you have to sympathise with them because they are a smaller government with a smaller income base, and the income for the Sustainable Farming Scheme comes from UK Treasury. There have been cuts and there are more to come, and there are cuts to the local authority in other areas despite that positive news I shared. Farming is effectively waiting. There's plenty of willing people, we all know them, that would do things if they could find the funding. Post-Brexit, there's an admittance that there isn't enough to really direct transformational change through government subsidy alone. It's like government's the common ground, right? You can all bash government. It's big, it's faceless, you're told constantly it's bureaucratic. But there is a role to play here for the food system. On average, farmers get about 4% of the price of any food item at any one time. Could that change? Should that change? Yes. If we want transformational change, will that be difficult? Yes. But can it be solved? Yes. Can it be solved by joining up government departmental thinking, government investment? Yes. Could social value as a chain be a way of delivering some of that? Yes. There is also a thread around what's been termed as green finance. So it's sort of a little bit like the Emperor's New Clothes in some ways at the moment, but there's effectively been a shift away just from production to public goods. So clean air, clean water, nature, access. There's a feeling that the private sector, insurance, water, in some cases, water companies, tourism businesses, might buy credits and might invest in land management to undertake measures or pay farmers to undertake measures to alleviate flooding. Now that's really sensible, and there is some proof of concept of that working elsewhere in the world. The UK is not very good at looking around the world and taking the best of learnings from elsewhere and then implementing them. So that needs to change. That's a bit of a political shift. But we need to fast track that, because there is a huge funding gap at the moment between desire, interest, and the ability to fund that delivery. And I think that's something we can all advocate in whatever forms of public life we engage in and whatever forms of consumerism and consumer engagement we're involved in.
Fantastic, James. That takes us neatly into the if we move towards looking at what we can do now and how we want to see 2024 playing out, and our part in that. So yeah, engagement in public life, obviously a pretty key one, and great for everyone to make their voices heard. I wonder if I go to Jamie to kick us off on solutions, perhaps talking a bit more about supermarkets, as we've seen in the chat, and I think we've referred to, sorry, Jamie, you referred to us attending some of the supermarket AGMs, including Tesco, and making some progress there. I wonder if you could just expand on that and talk about how we might take that forward together in 2024.
Sure. Well, just before I do, look, the big thing that's coming next year, as we're all aware, is an election. And ultimately, I don't really have confidence in politicians doing the right things for the right reasons. They'll do the right things for the wrong reasons, which ultimately is that they want to get elected, and that this has to become a political issue that causes pain. If you're going to vote next year, or I hope you do, wherever you are, be in touch with your candidates. Ask them what they plan to do. Don't just listen to the waffle, but ask for a really tangible, specific plan for sorting out our river. Hold them to account, and indeed make sure that they know this is a key election issue. I think we can see the politicians that are around us on manoeuvres on that front, and that's great, because this is heat, and that needs to continue. So shout loud, organise well, and make sure we have accountability in the year ahead for the general election. The story of the why will be one locally, but also nationally, and lots of people will be thinking about that. We will certainly be telling that story to the best of our ability to support change across the country. Talking to the supermarkets, I think there's a big opportunity here. The citizen power, the consumer power to place pressure on Tesco to then influence Avara, to influence the supply chain, is, in my opinion, the single biggest change that's happened in the river story to date. It hasn't been led by central government politicians. It hasn't been led by our regulators. It arguably hasn't even been led by traditional ENGOs, of which you might class the Wildlife Trust as one. It's been led by a grassroots citizen effort. And that is exciting, because that has moved the biggest corporate power organisation in this country, Tesco, to act. So what have we done? A small contribution, which was to attend the annual general meetings of our supermarkets, along with others, to put on the public record the request that they took action in their supply chain. We went to Tesco, to Marks and Spencer, to Sainsbury's. Waitrose don't have a public AGM because they're another form of organisation, as you know, but we got in touch with them. We've built that relationship. We want to hold them to account. And looking ahead, we can say thank you for engaging with us. Thank you for respecting us. And now we expect to see some tangible action in terms of you using your lobbying power, your financial power to influence the next general election, to influence government policy, not to keep your heads below the parapet. Specifically, we'll write to them. we ask that if you're interested in joining us on that letter, you back us, we'll have your voice as part of it. We'll invite them to the catchment to look at some practical, tangible changes on the ground to push them further about holding their own supply chain and set of farmers to account positively, and to be creative about citizen power and corporate power on the ground. And as I say, the opportunity at the highest level for Tesco and others to be pressuring quite a weak government to take more action than it is.
Great, thank you, Jamie. A couple of hands up. If I go to Councillor Swinglehurst next, and then to James from Radnorshire to follow up on that. Councillor Swinglehurst, feel free to.
Thanks very much, Francis. For those that don't know me, I'm the Cabinet Member for Herefordshire Council for the Environment. I also chair the River Wye Nutrient Management Board. I just want to pick up on this point that Jamie's making about the supply chain, the role of the public and public outrage in motivating the supply chain and how effective that's been, and it has been, and I'm very supportive of that. But I think we need to recognise when the supply chain starts to react, and that therefore the dialogue has to move forward. If it gets stuck, then actually we're in danger of it being counterproductive. So Tesco's have, well, Avara actually acted before Tesco's told them to, but Tesco's is also putting pressure on Avara. Avara have brought forward their roadmap by a year, so they're now looking at January next year to be exporting tonnage, significant tonnage. And they are also looking at permanent solutions, because clearly busing it out of the catchment is not sustainable. That's what they'll do for a year or 2 years or however long till they've got planning for more of a permanent solution. And Tesco's are also writing to all of their suppliers with assessed demands. I can't share that with you. I'm asking to get a copy of the letter so I can share it, but at the moment it's, I don't know quite how public that is, but they are reacting. But the question would then therefore be, if we focus solely on Tesco and Avara, everyone else can just sit below the parapet and go, that's all right, because Tesco and Avara are taking all the heat. And Nando's aren't getting any heat, and Lidl's and Aldi's and everybody else. So actually we need to be dynamic in our relationship with the supply chain, and where someone reacts and there is a good thing, that we say, okay, we recognise that you're making an effort. Well, what the rest are you doing? Because the danger is that you'll get a fracturing and you'll get Avara suppliers, and I've got some locally to me who are getting fed up with Avara asking them to do all this extra activity, so they're just going to somebody else, and we don't have a conversation with that somebody else. So we have to be careful about how we use the supply chain response. It's very, very powerful. It's probably the most powerful response that we've got, given the regulatory misalignment both sides of the border and the fact that neither government has really got a grip on this. The supply chain is dynamic, but we have to be careful about how it's responding, because what we need is the solution.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Councillor Swinglehurst. Over to James, but do keep your comments and ideas coming in the chat. We'd really like to hear from you as well, what you would like to see the Wildlife Trust do over the next year, or perhaps anything that you yourselves are planning or involved in. As we've discussed, collaboration is the key. So I'll let James come in here.
Sorry, Francis, can I be cheeky? I think Ali had her hand up, probably to build on what Alyssa said. So can I pass to her, please?
Absolutely, yeah. Sorry, Ali, go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. One of the issues that we've been encountering in our discussions with the supply chain is that it is not very clear. In fact, it's quite opaque as to where all the chickens and the eggs from the Wye end up, who's selling them and who's not, and therefore who needs to be playing a part in this conversation. It's not publicly available information. We can't put a freedom of information request in somewhere to find out who sells their chickens or their eggs to whom. And it does sort of hinder us in our engagement with the supply chain, the retail sector. But there is a piece of work we're doing internally which might help us shed some light on this. So that's a sort of watch this space, and it will really help us to work out exactly who we should be engaging with when we have that clearer idea of who is playing a role in the why and isn't really involved in those discussions at the moment.
Okay, can I just really quickly, of course, the other thing is not to focus entirely on the chicken and the egg, but also on the chip, the potato. Because the litter doesn't fly miraculously out of the chicken's arse into the river, it gets spread on the land. And it's that element that is very, very difficult to deal with. So we kind of, even if we can deal with the shed end of it, we're not dealing with the potato field or whatever, the spreading. And actually that's another interesting market. And if you take potatoes, you've got McCain saying they want to do regen spuds. Well, let's be having it then. That's a challenge that could go to them. So tell you what, why don't you label your potato fields, and then we'll know it's a McCain field. And if that field is falling off into the river, we can let you know, so you can do something about it. So that's we mustn't just look at chickens.
Yeah,
Right.
you're completely right. It's engaging with the chicken growers and the egg producers who generate that product, and that's one half of the story. But then you're completely right, it's also where does that product go and how is it utilized, so engaging with the places where that is being spread on the land.
Great, thank you so much, Ali. James, you were waiting to come in earlier. I don't know if it's on this topic or next steps generally, but over to you.
It was actually just a slow hand. I should have lowered it, sorry. I think that the points made by Alyssa and Ali are very, very important, and I wholeheartedly support that rounded approach. And yeah, I'll pass on any other comment. Thanks.
Fantastic, thanks so much. So I'm going to go over to the panel now with any further we're seeing lots of good stuff in the chat, so do keep your eye on that as well. But anything else that you're thinking would be a good idea for 2024? There's been mention of a hustings, if anyone would like to talk a bit more about that, in Radnorshire and Herefordshire. Jamie or James? Jamie's going for it.
Well, I was just going to suggest we go in reverse order this time to keep us moving.
I was reading the chat. Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. Just talking a bit more about potential next steps for 2024. And there has been mention of running a hustings next year, focused on rivers particularly. If that's an idea that you're supportive of and how people could get involved.
Very much supportive. I think with things like that, there's an element of being led by interest. If members would value it, we'd certainly do it. And I think it'd be interesting to do at wide catchment scale, and to keep that as the focal issue. Certainly, I mean, Ali is better placed being in the central team to talk about this, but there will be 5 key election asks pitched from the Wildlife Trust, and we will be encouraging people to quiz parliamentary candidates and ask them what they are going to stand against when it comes to nature and the environment. So I don't know if Ali wants to say a little bit on that now.
Yeah, I can say a few words about that. So yes, there are lots of nature asks that we'll be making of prospective parliamentary candidates, and engaging with the political parties as they're developing their manifestos. But one of those will be around rivers, and that really reflects the importance that we're seeing, across the public, of this huge recognition that our rivers are under massive strain, and that we can't go on as we are in terms of how we manage our water environment. So when it comes to engaging with politicians, ending river pollution is one of the key discussion points that we'll be having. And a couple of key aspects within that are around, firstly, enforcing existing regulations. So we have a reasonable, although not perfect, system of regulation when it comes to pollution of the water environment. But one of the key shortcomings we see is that it's not fully utilised at the moment, and that's partly political will. It's partly resourcing of the regulators, and we've seen over time both Natural Resources Wales and the Environment Agency and Natural England have had their budgets slashed, they've had their staff numbers reduced, they've had their monitoring regimes cut. So if we don't have the data, if we don't have the people on the ground, and we don't have the capacity to be able to go out and look at pollution, be that from farming or from the water sector, it's hardly surprising that we are seeing these levels of pollution in our waters. So ensuring that we have an effective and fair regulatory regime is one part of that ask. And then another key part is around our international obligations or commitments. So at the COP15 Biodiversity Conference this year, we committed to one of the targets, as did all the other signatories to the conference, which was around halving the impacts of nutrient pollution by 2030. So that's a pretty short time frame under which we have to take action, and we want to make sure that the regimes are in place that will enable us to do that. So that is both looking at the water industry and their contribution to nutrient pollution through both sewage treatment works and untreated sewage coming out of storm overflows. And then on the agriculture side, looking at the regime around nutrient management, around soil management, and making sure that we have the tools and the support schemes in place to enable us as a country to meet those targets. So those will be some of the key things that we'll be engaging with politicians over in the run up to the general election.
Nice one. Shall I jump in, Fran?
Yes, please do.
Great, and then others do. Well, look, just to reflect some of the ideas in the chat, we've got James talking about a carbon tax, Vey saying climate change the biggest issue, Pat building on what Ali's saying is a reform of our regulators. Many great ideas coming up. The politicians keen to make their presence known too. Good to see. Let me build from the bottom up. I think we need to get out there and continue our relationship building with our farmers and with our landowners. So watch this space for Radnorshire and Herefordshire Wildlife Trust, inviting you to be part of a local farm and community cluster on key parts of the Y corridor, where we can collaborate with our farmers to support them with, for example, natural flood management, planting hedges, helping them appropriately change land use or encouraged to be. Let's go a little bit further and celebrate the fantastic work that we know is happening with our citizen science work. Wildlife Trust, again, collaborating and coming to the table there in terms of more work on nature citizen science. We've seen the chemicals, we've seen the phosphorus measured, but we're also starting to measure the kingfishers and the otters. And I think that's important because it's important, and because to keep the story going, we will want to highlight to a broader audience the impact on nature. As Ali mentioned, the decline of the Y, formally announced by Natural England, but that story needs to be told not just in chemical terms, but in its impact on nature. That is a sad story to tell, but I think it's an important one. Let's go back to our annual general meetings of the supermarkets. You don't just go once, you go again, and then you go again. Let's go to Tesco, let's go to Sainsbury's, let's go to Marks and Spencer's. Let's challenge Alyssa, Ellie and Joe on the call to attend one of those AGMs, irrelevant of which political party you're from, to make the ask, to work with the supply chain, to have a collective approach, a cross-party, non-partisan to that vision for the future. We will get organised as citizens to appropriately hold our politicians to account with the general election. And yeah, I think that for me, the last thing, I think it's going to take a couple of years, but whatever your politics, I think those in it and outside of it know that our large regulators are not working and are not well enough supported. So we have to love those regulators and reform them with energy and creativity on the other side of the election.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jamie. Great summary of some of the things to look forward to next year. James and Ali, are there any 2024 highlights or big plans that you'd like to share that we haven't touched on, or any other ways people can get involved?
Yeah, one of the other big moments in 2024 is the approval of water companies' business plans. So we've primarily talked tonight about agricultural pollution, but certainly the role of the water sector is significant in many of our river systems. And even when they are not responsible for the bulk of the pollutant inputs in a particular river system, they can still play a really significant role in delivering improvements. Now, this will be equally relevant on either side of the border, because the water companies in England and Wales are both come under the remit of the economic regulator Ofwat, who have the sort of final say on what gets approved in terms of the plans that they have developed. So every company has developed a business plan, and they were submitted to Ofwat a month or two ago. And there's a quite long process where these plans are assessed and finalised over the coming year. So they'll be approved December next year, ready to start the process of delivery in 2025. Now, one of the things that a number of observers are really keen to see happening is the greater use of nature-based solutions and a sort of more flexible approach to how we deliver improvements for the water environment. And what I mean by that is that the water companies can play a significant role across catchments rather than just thinking about their own assets. And there's a great example from United Utilities in the River Petrel catchment, whereby their sewage treatment works was contributing a significant amount of phosphate pollution to the river system, and they needed to do something about that. Now, to make improvements in the traditional way would have involved spending a significant amount of money to upgrade the wastewater treatment works, and heavy use of chemicals and concrete and so on. But what they were able to demonstrate was that by making some improvements to the works, but also working with farmers across the catchment to help them improve their land management and reduce the amount of phosphate that was coming out of their farms, they could deliver a greater improvement overall to the phosphate levels in the river than they would have done just by upgrading their works. And they did that at a £7 million saving compared to traditional investment routes, which means that that's a much reduced burden on water company customers, because of course it's water company customers that pay for everything that the companies do. And this means that you can deliver those improvements in a way that are more cost effective for customers and also have greater biodiversity benefits across the catchment. Now, to do this needs an element of greater flexibility in the way that the targets are set for water companies, in the way that the regulators engage with them, and in the way that landowning communities engage with them as well. So that kind of solution is something we'd like to see more of in the business plans that are being approved by the regulator over the coming year. Now, part of that process will be ongoing engagement with customers. So wherever the opportunity arises, if you have the chance to engage with your water companies through this business planning process, advocating for these solutions that deliver more for the natural environment, and potentially at a bill saving for yourselves as well, is something that people can do to support these better outcomes for our river systems.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ali. Brilliant. Thank you. Loads of great stuff in the chat. Sorry, reading as I'm talking. Lots of great ideas. I think we've heard lots of good steps that we're planning on doing next year. But as always, if you've got other ideas that come to you just after the meeting ends, as these things always do, please do get in touch with us at Herefordshire or at Radnorshire, and let us know what you'd like to see happening in 2024. But as you can hear, we've got quite a lot of plans, so we'll keep it going. But yes, do get in touch. We will follow up from today's meeting. We'll share the recording, so for people that missed it, or if there are bits that you missed and you want to listen again, and we will be in touch in the new year with an email setting out some of our plans for 2024 and how you can get involved. Jamie, James and Ali, have you got any closing comments you'd like to make before we call it a night?
So big thank you. Let's keep organising. We are but one voice and set of ideas for the river. There are many on this call and many more. So yeah, just to emphasise a big thank you to everyone's participation, and we're looking forward to working in collaboration in the year ahead.
Yeah, I'd just add thanks to everyone for coming tonight, for your interest and support. Do keep in touch, look out for updates about forthcoming election campaigns, but also, good news stories and opportunities to engage with the projects that we've got underway in collaboration. As Jamie said, this is about people power. And as Alyssa said, this is about thinking about the role of the supply chain and how we might shift the dial and encourage further change and support for further change through that mechanism. So onwards.
And I just close by saying I completely agree. Everything we're doing as Wildlife Trust wouldn't be possible without the engagement that we have with other organisations, community groups, individuals. So huge thanks to everyone for your enthusiasm for turning around the fate of the Wye.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much to everyone that's joined us this evening. Thank you to James, Jamie and Ali for talking to us and sharing their thoughts. And we will be in touch in the new year with all our news going forwards. So thank you ever so much, and have safe journeys home. Lovely evenings.
Thank you, Francis. Cheers.